December 16th, 1944. 1540 hours. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Through the makeshift scope assembled from salvaged wreckage, Sergeant Jack McBride watched a German officer in a distinctive leather coat standing 630 yards distant. Snow fell in thick curtains. Fog rolled between the pine trees like smoke from a funeral pyre. The temperature had dropped to -12 degrees Celsius. No rational marksman would attempt a shot in these conditions. But Jack McBride had already fired 131 rounds over the past 7 days. This would be number 132. His finger found the trigger. The Springfield 1903 kicked against his shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, built from enemy telescope parts, spent brass casings, and copper wires scavenged from a destroyed radio, McBride watched the German officer drop into the snow. He opened his weathered notebook with fingers that no longer trembled and wrote in precise script, "Kill 132, 630 yards, scope still holding 0. Then he gathered his rifle, broke down his position with practiced efficiency, and disappeared into the forest like smoke dissolving into winter air. Behind him, German soldiers would search for the phantom they had named Der Geist, the ghost. They would find nothing but spent shell casings and boot prints leading nowhere. 7 days earlier, that impossible scope had not existed. The man who built it was supposed to be dead. The story begins not in the frozen hell of the Hürtgen Forest, but on red Oklahoma clay, where a boy learned that poverty teaches the hardest lessons and the most valuable skills. Stillwater, Oklahoma, summer of 1936. Jack McBride knelt in the red dirt with a rifle older than his father and a scope he had built from an aluminum tube and the lens from his dead mother's reading glasses. 15 years old, thin as a fence post, with hands already calloused from work that should have belonged to grown men. His father, Thomas, had left 6 months after consumption took his mother. Just walked out one morning and never returned, leaving Jack alone in a house that smelled like sickness and old sorrow. To survive, Jack hunted. Rabbits for 3 cents each at the butcher shop in town, deer when he could get close enough, when the McCready family would buy the meat off him for $2 and look the other way about hunting out of season. Anything that moved and could be sold became currency in a depression economy that ground down the weak and the young prepared. But the McBride family had no money for a proper rifle scope. So Jack made one. He learned to adjust the focus using pine resin softened over a candle flame. He calibrated the 0 by shooting at tin cans placed at measured distances, walking the paces himself because he had no rangefinder. He repaired it with whatever materials he could scavenge from the town dump, from abandoned farms, from the generous wreckage of American poverty. His high school physics teacher, Mr. Harold Chen, had studied engineering at Berkeley before the crash sent him back to teaching in small Oklahoma towns where educated men took what work they could find. He found Jack one afternoon working on the scope behind the school. "You understand optics, Jack. Not from books, from necessity. That's the best teacher." Jack had looked up from his work, suspicious of praise he had not earned. "I just need to shoot rabbits, Mr. Chen, that's all." But Mr. Chen had taught him anyway. Focal length and magnification, light gathering and lens geometry, the mathematics of precision that engineers spent 4 years learning, compressed into lunch hours and after-school sessions because Mr. Chen recognized something in this poor farm boy that reminded him of himself at that age. Hungry, brilliant, trapped by circumstances. "You could go to college, Jack, study engineering. Get out of here." Jack had smiled without humor. "Can't eat a college degree, sir. Can't sell it at the butcher shop." The lessons continued anyway, and 8 years later, in a frozen German forest with his military-issue scope shattered beyond repair, those lunch-hour lessons would save Jack McBride's life and end 132 others. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burned. Jack McBride, 20 years old, walked into the Army recruiting office in Oklahoma City not because he loved his country, though he did, and not because he hated the Japanese, though he would learn to, but because there was nothing left for him in Stillwater. The farm had been foreclosed. The butcher shop had closed. The girl he had loved in that tentative way of young men had married someone else, someone with prospects and a future that did not smell like rabbit blood and red dirt. The Army discovered what Jack already knew. He could shoot. Better than good. Better than anyone the training sergeants had ever seen. They gave him a Springfield 1903 rifle with a Unertl 8-power scope, the finest sniper rifle the American military produced, and taught him to kill men instead of rabbits. Jack loved that rifle the way some men loved women. He knew every scratch on its stock, every quirk of its trigger, the exact point where the bolt would stick if he did not keep it clean and oiled. The Unertl scope was a miracle of precision engineering, capable of resolving a man's face at 800 yards. For 6 weeks in the Hurtgen forest, that rifle had been his constant companion. 47 confirmed kills. 47 German soldiers who would never go home. 47 faces he saw clearly through that perfect scope before he squeezed the trigger and ended their wars forever. Then the German artillery found his position. November 28, 1944. Vossenach, Germany. The 28th Infantry Division had been grinding forward through the Hurtgen forest for 2 months, paying in blood for every 100 yards of pine trees and frozen mud. They called it the meat grinder. They called it the death factory. They called it the place where American advantages in armor and artillery meant nothing because you could not see 50 yards through the forest, and the Germans knew every trail, every bunker, every killing field. Jack McBride had been operating as a sniper for 6 weeks. He knew the pattern now. Find a position before dawn. Watch through the scope for hours. Select targets. Officers first when possible. Radio operators, forward observers, anyone who made the German machine function. Fire. Displace immediately. Move to the next position. Repeat until darkness forced him back to American lines. He was in his foxhole cleaning his rifle when the 150mm shell landed 20 feet away. The blast wave picked him up like a child's toy and threw him through the air. He had time to think. So this is how I die. Before the crater rim rose up to meet him. He hit hard enough to crack 3 ribs, hard enough to rupture both eardrums, hard enough that the world became a silent movie filmed in shades of gray and red. When his vision cleared, when he could breathe without feeling like his chest was full of broken glass, Jack checked his rifle first. The Springfield 1903 had survived. The wood stock had a new crack. The barrel was still straight. The action still worked. But the Unertl scope had shattered. The internal lenses were pulverized to powder. The adjustment turrets had been wrenched sideways, bent at angles that made Jack's hands shake just looking at them. The mounting brackets had twisted into abstract art sculptures, useless for anything except demonstrating what high explosives could do to precision instruments. Jack held that broken scope in his hands and felt something inside his chest crack that had nothing to do with his fractured ribs. Without this scope, he was not a sniper. Without this scope, he was just another infantry grunt with a rifle, waiting his turn to die in the frozen mud. He wrapped the broken scope carefully, thinking perhaps the lens elements could be salvaged, perhaps some piece could be reused. In his hands lay hundreds of hours of training, 47 confirmed kills, and a future that had suddenly contracted to nothing. He packed it in his kit and limped back to American lines with his Springfield slung over his shoulder. November 30th, 1944. Field Headquarters, 28th Infantry Division. Supply Sergeant James Kowalski sat behind a desk made from ammunition crates and looked at Jack McBride with the expression of a man who had heard every sad story the war could produce and had run out of sympathy sometime around the Battle of the Bulge. "I need a scope replacement. Unerdal 8 power." Kowalski did not look up from his requisition forms. "Don't have any. Next." "I'm a sniper. I need that scope to do my job." "I know who you are, McBride. I also know I have 20 other guys who need scopes. Division allocated 3 replacements this month. Priority goes to assault units. Your battalion is defensive. You're at the bottom of the list." Jack felt his jaw tighten. "So what am I supposed to do?" "Figure it out yourself, or grab a Garand and join the regular infantry. Either way, stop wasting my time." Jack stood there for a long moment, looking at this sergeant who held the power to end his career with a shrug and a signature. Then he turned and walked out into the cold without another word. Behind him, he heard Kowalski call out to the next man in line. Outside, in the mud and the sleet, Corporal Danny Sullivan from Boston, a medic who had pulled more than a few soldiers back from the edge of death, watched Jack's face and knew exactly what had just happened. "No scope?" "No scope." Danny lit a cigarette, offered one to Jack, who shook his head. "You're good with mechanical stuff, right? I've seen you fix everything from Jeep engines to broken watches. Why don't you just make yourself a scope?" Jack looked at Danny like he had suggested building a rocket ship from soup cans. "Make a scope out of what? Hope and good intentions?" "You made one when you were 15, out of your mother's reading glasses. You told me that story yourself." "That was for shooting rabbits at 50 yards, Danny. This is different." Danny shrugged. "Different scale, same principle. This whole forest is full of wrecked equipment. German stuff, American stuff. Optics everywhere, if you know what you're looking for. You've got the knowledge. You've got the need. All you need is the will to try." Jack stood silent, watching the sleet fall and the other soldiers move through the camp like shadows. Everyone focused on their own survival, their own small wars within the larger war. In his mind, gears began to turn. Old lessons from Mr. Chen. Focal length, magnification, light gathering. If I had a good objective lens and an eyepiece, the right tube assembly. Danny grinned through his cigarette smoke. "There you go. Stop thinking about what you don't have. Start thinking about what you can scavenge." That night, Jack McBride made a decision that would change the mathematics of war in the Kleinhaus sector. He would build his own scope, or die trying. December 1st through 8th, 1944. Hurtgen Forest. While his ribs healed and his hearing slowly returned to his left ear, Jack began hunting through the wreckage of industrial warfare. The Hurtgen Forest battles had littered the landscape with the broken machinery of 2 armies trying to destroy each other. What other men saw as trash, Jack saw as components. He found the objective lens first. A German Scharrenrohr artillery observation telescope, destroyed in an artillery strike that had killed the forward observer team, lay half buried in a shell crater. The telescope itself was ruined, but the objective lens had survived, protected by a steel housing designed to withstand artillery recoil. Jack held that lens up to the weak December sunlight and saw perfection. German optical engineering at its finest, better than anything the Americans produced. He wrapped it carefully in cloth and continued his search. The ocular assembly came from a pair of German binoculars he found in an abandoned machine gun position. One barrel was shattered, the other remained intact, its lens system pristine. Jack carefully disassembled the surviving barrel with hands that had learned patience from hunting, extracting the lens group that would provide magnification when properly paired with his artillery telescope objective. But the hardest problem remained: mounting. A rifle scope must survive repeated recoil without the lenses shifting even a fraction of a millimeter. Any movement in the optical alignment creates errors that compound at distance. 600 yards away, a 1-degree shift in lens position means missing by 3 feet. Jack needed to build a mounting system that could maintain precision through hundreds of shots using only hand tools and salvaged materials. He collected 30 spent brass casings from fired cartridges. He gathered rubber gaskets from destroyed gas masks. He salvaged copper wire from a burned-out radio. He hammered lead bullets into thin foil. Then, working by candlelight in a dugout shelter, using his trench knife and a flat rock as an improvised lathe, Jack McBride began to build the impossible. Each brass casing had to be cut to exact length. He measured carefully, checking each dimension twice because mistakes meant starting over. He cut with his knife, slowly, carefully, the way Mr. Chen had taught him that precision was not about speed, but about consistency. He fitted the casings inside each other, creating a telescoping tube structure. Between each section, he inserted compressed rubber gaskets that would absorb recoil while maintaining alignment. He wrapped the entire assembly in copper wire, providing both structural support and the ability to make fine adjustments to the spacing. On the 4th night, Captain Robert Chen found Jack working by candlelight, surrounded by brass shavings and failed attempts and drawings that covered every surface of the dugout. "McBride, what are you building?" "A scope, sir." Chen moved closer, examining the components with an engineer's eye. He was a medical officer now, but he had studied engineering before the Depression changed everyone's plans. German objective lens. Nice find. Ocular from binoculars. Nested brass tube assembly. He paused, calculating. Focal length of the objective is roughly 300 millimeters. Your ocular is about 40 millimeters. That gives you 7.5 power magnification. But your field of view will be narrow, maybe 8 degrees, and your eye relief will be short. Jack looked up at the captain. "I know, sir." Chen smiled. "Of course you do. You don't need a textbook. You need it to work." He reached into his medical bag and pulled out a set of brass calipers, precise instruments meant for measuring surgical tools. "Use these. Your scope doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to be exact." Jack took the calipers with something close to reverence. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me if it works." December 8th, 1944. Night. Jack mounted the completed scope onto his Springfield 1903, using the mounting rings from his destroyed Unertl, modified with brass shims and lead foil spacers to accommodate the improvised tube's diameter. The final assembly measured just over 13 inches long and weighed less than 1.5 pounds. It looked crude, almost comical. Brass casings wrapped in copper wire, rubber gaskets visible between the sections. Nothing like the elegant precision of the Unertl it replaced. Jack put his eye to the scope for the first time. The image resolved sharp and clear. Magnification good. Light gathering excellent even in the dim candlelight. The crosshairs he had made from human hair strands, positioned across the rear lens, provided a precise aiming reference. But none of that mattered if the scope could not hold 0 through actual firing. Tomorrow would provide the only test that counted. Tomorrow, Jack McBride would discover if 7 days of work had produced a functional weapon or an elaborate exercise in false hope. He wrapped the scope in cloth, laid it beside his Springfield, and tried to sleep. Outside, the forest made its night sounds. Artillery rumbled in the distance. Somewhere, men were dying. Tomorrow, if his scope worked, more would die. German soldiers who right now were sleeping or standing watch or writing letters home to wives and mothers who would never see them again. Jack closed his eyes and saw their faces already, sharp and clear through a scope that had not yet proven itself. In war, he had learned, you killed the enemy before they killed you. You used whatever tools you had. You adapted. You survived. Tomorrow, the improviser would become the ghost. Tomorrow, Jack McBride would learn if innovation could defeat factory precision, if desperation could produce excellence, if one man with a homemade scope could change the mathematics of killing. The scope lay beside him in the darkness, waiting, ready. And in the German positions across the death line, 132 men went about their evening routines, unaware that tomorrow, a farmer from Oklahoma with a scope built from their own salvaged equipment would begin the 7 bloodiest days of their sector's war. The first kill would come at dawn, December 9th, 1944. 0530 hours, temperature minus 12 degrees Celsius. Jack McBride crawled into position while darkness still held the forest. The destroyed German bunker northeast of Kleinhau offered excellent fields of fire across what the Germans called the Todeszone, the death line, a stretch of open ground where American advances had stalled repeatedly, paid for in blood that soaked into frozen mud and disappeared like it had never existed. He settled the Springfield against the bunker's shattered concrete, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. 3 fractured ribs made every movement an exercise in controlled pain. But pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive. In the Hurtgen forest, that was all anyone could ask. Jack looked through his homemade scope as dawn light filtered through the pine trees. The image quality shocked him. Sharp, clear, better than he had dared hope. The German optical glass gathered the weak morning light and delivered it to his eye with a clarity that made the distance collapse. At 600 yards, he could see German soldiers moving between positions. Their relaxed movements spoke of men who believed themselves safe from American rifle fire. They smoked cigarettes. They talked. One soldier stood beside a distinctive bent tree, laughing at something his companion said. Jack selected him as the first target, not because of hatred, not because of anger, because the bent tree provided an excellent reference point for confirming his scope's 0. Because this soldier stood in clear view. Because in war, someone has to die first, and tactical necessity does not care about laughter or youth, or the families waiting back home. He settled the improvised crosshairs on the German soldier's center mass, accounted for wind, a light breeze from left to right, compensated for bullet drop at 600 yards, roughly 24 inches for the cartridge he was firing. The breathing pattern he had learned hunting rabbits in Oklahoma. Exhale slowly. Hold. Let the crosshairs settle like snow finding its resting place. The Springfield 1903 recoiled against his shoulder. In his crosshairs, still trained on target, Jack watched the German soldier drop instantly. Clean hit, upper chest. The scope had held 0 through the shot. The lenses had not shifted. 7 days of work in a frozen dugout had produced a functional weapon. Jack's hands trembled as he wrote in his notebook. Shot 1, 600 yards, confirmed kill, scope holding. Then he did what would keep him alive for the next 7 days. He immediately displaced to a secondary position 100 yards east. The German soldier's companion had dropped into cover, shouting warnings Jack could not hear at this distance. Soon, German marksmen would be searching for the sniper who had just announced his presence. They would be looking in the wrong place. Over the next 3 hours, Jack fired 11 more shots from 4 different positions. 11 more German soldiers died without ever seeing the man who killed them. Each shot confirmed what the first had proven. The improvised scope worked. Not just adequately, exceptionally. By noon on December 9th, the German forces in the Kleinhau sector had become aware of a problem. An American sniper was operating at ranges that should have been impossible. But the nature of that problem, The fact that they faced a single rifleman with a scope built from salvaged trash would take days to emerge from the fog of war and military bureaucracy. Jack returned to American lines at 1400 hours with detailed notes on German positions. His tally for the day? 39 confirmed kills. Lieutenant Charles Hammond, the battalion intelligence officer, looked at the notebook like it contained instructions for building a time machine. 39 kills in one day, McBride. That's statistically impossible. Jack met his eyes without expression. Yes, sir. But that's what happened. Hammond stared at the crude scope mounted on Jack's Springfield. Brass casings wrapped in copper wire. Rubber gaskets visible between sections. It looked like something a desperate man had assembled in a basement, which was exactly what it was. What the hell is that thing? Something that works, sir. That night, while other soldiers played cards or wrote letters home or simply stared at nothing, Jack sat alone in his dugout and faced what he had done. 39 men dead. 39 faces he had seen clearly before squeezing the trigger and ending their wars forever. He opened his notebook to a blank page and wrote in the careful script his mother had taught him before consumption took her. 39 men today. I saw one share a cigarette with his friend before I shot him. He looked 19. I am 23. This scope works. I hate that it works. Corporal Danny Sullivan found him there, surrounded by the quiet that comes after killing. You okay, Jack? I killed 39 people today, Danny. And every one of them was trying to kill Americans. You saved lives. Our lives. I know. But I saw them laugh, share cigarettes. They were human. Danny sat down beside him on the cold ground. Then you still have a soul. Keep it that way. But don't let it make you hesitate when you need to shoot. Hesitation kills you and everyone depending on you. Jack nodded, but did not answer. How could he explain that the scope's clarity was both gift and curse? That seeing his targets so precisely made them impossible to forget? That every face was now filed away in his memory with perfect detail, waiting to surface in dreams he knew would come for the rest of his life, however long that turned out to be. December 10th, 1944. The German forces had adjusted their tactics overnight. Movement patterns became irregular. They used more covered approaches, reduced daylight activity. Standard counter-sniper measures that should have reduced Jack's effectiveness by half. Instead, Jack adapted. He shifted to what hunters call ambush shooting. Rather than targeting soldiers in transit, he focused on fixed positions. German soldiers in fighting positions eventually had to move, shift for comfort, reach for equipment, observe their own forces. These micro-movements, invisible to the naked eye at 600 yards, appeared clearly in his crosshairs. He watched a machine gun position for 2 hours before the gunner made the mistake of leaning forward to check his ammunition belt. The motion exposed his upper body for perhaps 3 seconds. Jack's bullet found him in that window, and the machine gun went silent. By nightfall, Jack's notebook showed 18 new entries, 30 shots fired. His accuracy had improved to 60% as he learned to read the rhythm of German positions, to anticipate the moments when men forgot caution for comfort. German battalion-level intelligence reports, captured weeks later, showed growing concern. Enemy sniper operations northeast of Kleinhau demonstrate exceptional capability. Estimated 3 to 4 sniper teams operating at extended ranges. Casualties among forward observers and radio operators particularly severe. Recommend deployment of dedicated counter-sniper elements. They thought they faced multiple teams. The idea that one man with a homemade scope could achieve such results lay outside their doctrine, beyond their tactical imagination. Jack's rapid displacement between positions created the illusion of multiple shooters. He never used the same position twice in one day, never established a pattern, moved like smoke through the forest, appearing where he was not expected, vanishing before counterfire could find him. December 11th, 1944. Heavy snow began falling at dawn, reducing visibility to less than 200 yards. German forces assumed the weather would ground American sniper operations. Their assumption carried the weight of reasonable tactical thinking. No one could effectively engage targets they could not see. But Jack discovered his improvised scope possessed an unexpected advantage. The large German objective lens gathered significantly more light than standard American military scopes. In the dim conditions of heavy snowfall, Jack could see clearly at ranges where even German military optics struggled. This advantage stemmed from the lens's original purpose. Artillery observation telescopes required excellent low-light performance for dawn and dusk fire missions. The Germans had built that capability into their glass, and now that same glass was killing their soldiers in conditions they had deemed safe. Jack moved closer than his usual 600 yards. At ranges of 400 to 500 yards, his visibility exceeded German soldiers' naked eye capability by a factor of 4 or more. He could see them clearly. They could barely see their own positions through the falling snow. The tally for December 11th, 21 confirmed kills from 28 shots, 75% accuracy. German forces, unable to observe his muzzle flashes in the snow and lacking clear sight of his positions, suffered casualties without any ability to respond effectively. German regimental reports from December 11th showed panic beginning to replace professional assessment. Sniper activity continues despite weather conditions that should prevent operations. Casualties exceed acceptable levels. Forward positions becoming untenable. Soldiers refusing to expose themselves for even basic position maintenance. Request immediate deployment of specialist counter-sniper teams from Division Reserve. That night, lying in his dugout listening to the wind howl through the shattered forest, Jack thought about what he was becoming. The kills no longer carried individual weight. They were numbers, tactical successes, evidence of a scope that should not work but did. The German soldiers had started calling him something. American signals intelligence had intercepted the radio chatter. Der Geist, the ghost. A phantom who could see through weather, shoot through snow, kill from impossible distances. Jack closed his eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be just a farmer from Oklahoma. But that person seemed very far away now. December 12th, 1944. The German counter-sniper teams arrived at dawn. Professional soldiers, graduates of dedicated sniper schools, equipped with precision rifles and excellent optics. These men understood sniper tactics, possessed years of training, knew the terrain intimately. They were the best the German army could field. Jack spotted the first team at 06:45 hours. 2 men, a shooter and spotter, establishing position in a partially destroyed building 700 yards distant. He watched them for 45 minutes, learning their patterns with the patience that poverty and hunting had taught him. The spotter made regular scans with binoculars, every 12 to 15 minutes like clockwork. The shooter remained focused on his scope, searching for targets. They rotated positions occasionally to prevent fatigue. Professional, disciplined, dangerous. When the spotter's binoculars swung away from Jack's sector, he fired. 720 yards, the longest shot he would attempt during the entire campaign. The bullet took perhaps 2 seconds to reach its target, time enough for Jack to wonder if he had calculated the drop correctly, if the wind had shifted, if his improvised scope would fail him at this critical moment. The German shooter slumped forward against his rifle. The spotter immediately went to ground, facing the tactical dilemma every counter-sniper team fears. Moving meant exposure. Staying meant waiting for a follow-up shot from an enemy whose position remained unknown. Jack did not give him time to solve the problem. 15 seconds after the first shot, he fired again. The spotter had begun to low crawl toward cover. The bullet found him halfway to safety. 2 trained snipers, professional equipment, home terrain advantage. Dead in 15 seconds because Jack McBride had better optics and better patience, and a willingness to take shots that should have been impossible. The day ended with 12 confirmed kills from 16 shots. The reduced number reflected necessary caution against professional opposition, but the Germans had lost their counter-sniper team without ever locating Jack's position. December 13th, 1944. The 5th day brought the psychological collapse Jack had been inflicting systematically for nearly a week. American signals intelligence intercepted German radio transmissions that painted a picture of unit cohesion breaking down. We cannot maintain positions under current conditions. Men will not expose themselves. Resupply impossible during daylight. Forward positions effectively abandoned. Request permission to withdraw to secondary line. German command denied the withdrawal request. They could not afford to yield ground in the Hürtgen forest, where every 100 yards had cost both sides thousands of casualties. But denying withdrawal did not solve the sniper problem. Jack observed the breakdown in real time. Soldiers moving between positions in panicked rushes instead of tactical bounds. Officers shouting orders that went ignored. Entire sections abandoning their positions without authorization because the fear had grown larger than military discipline. He watched one young German soldier, perhaps 20 years old, crying in his foxhole while an NCO screamed at him. The soldier's hands shook. He refused to move despite direct orders. Refused to expose himself to the ghost who could see everything and kill from impossible distances. Jack could have shot the NCO, an easy target, but he made a choice that surprised himself. He killed the NCO and spared the terrified soldier. "Power without restraint is tyranny, mister," Chen had said once. Even in war, maybe especially in war, restraint mattered. The NCO fell. The young soldier scrambled deeper into his foxhole, probably thinking he was next, probably preparing to die. Jack displaced to his next position and left him alive. 14 kills that day from 18 shots. Each shot reinforced German fears that nowhere was safe, that the American sniper could see everything, that exposure meant death. That night, Captain Chen found Jack cleaning his rifle with movements that had become mechanical, automatic, empty of thought. "McBride, you need to sleep." "Can't sleep, sir." 98 kills in 5 days. "Do you understand what that means?" "I am good at my job." "No. It means you are succeeding beyond normal human parameters. When a man becomes too successful at killing, he starts to change, starts to lose pieces of himself." Jack looked up from his rifle. "I am still myself." "You wrote Der Geist in your notebook last night." You are starting to believe your own legend. That is when you become dangerous to yourself. "What do you want me to do, sir? Stop?" Chen sat down on an ammunition crate. "One more day, McBride. After that, I want you to rest. Not because you are not capable, because you are too capable. That scope is turning you into something that is not quite human anymore." Jack nodded slowly. One more day. Then what? Could he go back to being just another soldier after this? Could he see the world through normal vision after magnification had shown him how clearly you could see death coming? He did not know. But he would find out soon. December 14th, 1944. The sixth day brought German artillery. At 0600 hours, heavy guns began systematic bombardment of every ridgeline where Jack had operated. 4 hours of sustained fire that chewed the landscape into moonscape craters and splintered trees. Jack watched from a position he had never used before. His improvised optics showed him German shells destroying yesterday's hide, the day before's overwatch point. Locations where he had sent German soldiers to their deaths now received the same treatment. Smart tactics, professional response, completely ineffective. When the artillery shifted to a new sector, Jack waited 30 minutes. Then he resumed operations. German soldiers, convinced the artillery had eliminated the sniper threat, moved with renewed confidence. Resupply operations resumed. Position rotations occurred on predictable schedules. They made the fatal mistake of believing that enough explosives could kill a man who moved like smoke. Jack's notebook filled with 28 more entries by day's end. 33 shots fired, 85% accuracy. German forces returned to the paralyzed defensive posture of previous days, only now the fear had deepened into something approaching terror. German intelligence reports captured weeks later showed complete tactical bewilderment. Artillery bombardment of suspected sniper positions ineffective. Enemy sniper operations resume immediately following artillery preparation. Current assessment indicates enemy operates multiple positions simultaneously or possesses supernatural awareness of our countermeasures. No rational tactical explanation for observed enemy capabilities. The phrase supernatural awareness appeared in formal German military intelligence documents. Professional soldiers, veterans of years of combat, had begun attributing Jack's success to capabilities beyond normal human capacity. They were right, in a way. What he was doing should not be possible. One man with a homemade scope should not be able to paralyze an entire sector, should not be able to see through weather that grounded other snipers, should not be able to anticipate countermeasures and avoid them. But the scope gave him clarity, and clarity in war was the same as prophecy. December 16th, 1944. The seventh day arrived with clear skies and bitter cold that turned breath to ice crystals. Jack moved to his final position before dawn, a shell crater on a reverse slope that others had dismissed as tactically worthless. But the crater provided narrow sight lines toward 3 German positions, and narrow was all Jack needed. He settled into the frozen mud with his Springfield and his impossible scope and began his last day of hunting. The kills came with mechanical efficiency. Observe, select target, calculate wind and drop, fire, confirm, displace, repeat. The pattern had become so ingrained that conscious thought seemed unnecessary. His body knew what to do. His hands moved through the motions like a pianist playing a concerto performed 10,000 times. By 1500 hours, he had fired 32 shots and confirmed 28 kills, his highest accuracy rate of the entire campaign, 87.5%. The scope had never performed better. Or perhaps Jack had simply become so proficient with the weapon that man and machine had merged into a single system. At 1540 hours, he observed a German officer in a distinctive leather coat directing defensive improvements to a forward position. The officer carried a map case and moved with the authority of command. 630 yards distant, clear shot despite the afternoon shadows lengthening across the snow. Jack settled the crosshairs and saw the officer's face with brutal clarity. Young, perhaps 25 years old. Wedding ring on his left hand catching the weak sunlight. For the first time in 7 days, Jack hesitated. In his crosshairs, this was not just a target. This was a man with a wife, maybe children. A life that extended beyond this frozen forest and this terrible war. Someone who laughed and loved and dreamed of a future that would never arrive if Jack pulled the trigger.
3 seconds of hesitation.
3 seconds of remembering that he was still human, still capable of seeing the humanity in the men he killed. Then the calculation completed itself in his mind. This officer was directing defenses that would kill Americans. Kill Danny. Kill Captain Chen. Kill the soldiers who depended on Jack to do exactly what he had been doing for 7 days. He pulled the trigger. The officer dropped into the snow. Kill number 132. Jack packed his scope, broke down his position, and withdrew to American lines. By 1600 hours, the 7-day campaign was complete. The ghost vanished into the forest, leaving behind only empty shell casings and German reports about supernatural awareness. That night, Jack wrote his final entry of the campaign. Number 132. Officer. 630 yards. Leather coat. Wedding ring. I hesitated for 3 seconds. First time in 7 days. Maybe I am still human after all. Maybe that is good, or maybe that hesitation will get me killed tomorrow. But there will be no tomorrow. Captain Chen's orders. The ghost dies tonight. Jack McBride lives. If I can remember how. Lieutenant Hammond requested the scope for technical analysis the next morning. Jack handed it over with the feeling of giving away a piece of his soul. The scope had been his companion, his tool, his weapon, his curse for 7 days. Letting it go felt like amputation. Captain Eugene Roberts of the Division Ordnance Section examined the scope with the fascination of an engineer confronting the impossible made real. His technical report, preserved in National Archives files, concluded with words that would have made Mr. Chen proud. The assembly demonstrates sophisticated understanding of optical principles despite lacking formal training, maintains approximately 0.5 minute of angle accuracy through tested firing cycles, comparable to military-issue equipment costing 40 times more to manufacture. Recommend recognition of achievement. But note that individual improvisation cannot be institutionalized without quality control standards. The Army celebrated Jack's achievement with a Distinguished Service Cross and a citation that mentioned his homemade scope and exceptional marksmanship. Then they filed away his methods and returned to standardized procurement, because institutions fear the very innovation they claim to reward. Jack trained 17 other soldiers in improvised scope construction over the following weeks. 5 scopes worked well, 8 performed adequately, 4 failed completely. The lesson was clear. Not every soldier possessed the combination of technical knowledge, patience, and creative desperation that had produced Jack's success. In February 1945, Jack received a letter forwarded through Red Cross channels. From Greta Schneider, widow of Oberleutnant Karl Schneider, kill number 132. The letter was written in careful English. Dear American soldier, I learned you were the sniper called Der Geist. You killed my husband on December 16, 1944. He was 26 years old. We had been married 2 years. We had a daughter he never met. I do not write to curse you. War made you kill him, not hatred. I write because I want you to know Karl spoke of Der Geist with fear, but also respect. He told his men you were the most skilled opponent he ever faced. In his last letter, he wrote, if I die, I hope it is to a worthy adversary, not random chance. You were that adversary. I hope you survived. I hope you can find peace. Karl would want that. Jack read the letter 3 times, with hands that shook worse than they had when he fired his first shot through the improvised scope. Danny found him sitting in the weak February sunlight, the letter held loosely in fingers that had killed 132 men, but could barely hold a single piece of paper. She forgave you, Jack. No. She acknowledged me. That is different. Harder, maybe. Jack wrote his response that night. Dear Mrs. Schneider, your letter reached me in Germany. I remember your husband. In my crosshairs, I saw his wedding ring before I fired. I hesitated for 3 seconds. The only time in 7 days I hesitated. I cannot ask forgiveness for doing my duty, but I can tell you your husband was brave. He did not hide. He led his men, knowing der Geist was hunting. That took courage I am not sure I possess. I hope your daughter grows in a world where men like me are not necessary, where scopes like mine are not needed. With respect, Jack McBride. He never received a response. Perhaps she never got the letter. Perhaps she chose not to reply. Perhaps acknowledgement was enough, and forgiveness was a bridge too far for both of them. In April 1945, Jack was wounded by artillery fire near Nuremberg. The scope itself survived the blast that sent shrapnel through Jack's left shoulder. Captain Chen extracted the metal fragments and told Jack his war was over. You've done enough, McBride. More than enough. Jack spent his recovery in a hospital in England, then returned to the United States in June 1945. The war in Europe had ended. The war in the Pacific would end in August. Jack McBride came home to an Oklahoma that felt like a foreign country after 3 years of seeing the world through magnified clarity. In August 1945, Jack received a letter from Captain Robert Chen, now practicing medicine in San Francisco. Dear Jack, I heard you made it home. I am glad. That scope you built proved everything I tried to teach you about applied physics. But more importantly, you survived. That matters more than any number of confirmed kills. If you are ever in California, look me up. I would like to meet Jack McBride, the farmer, not just Jack McBride, the sniper. Respectfully, Robert Chen. Jack never made it to California, but he kept the letter in his Bible for 53 years. He married Sarah Mitchell in June 1946. She knew he had been a soldier, but asked no questions about what he had done, and Jack offered no answers. Some doors, once closed, should remain that way. They bought a small farm outside Stillwater, raised 4 children, lived a life of deliberate ordinariness that was Jack's way of proving to himself that he was still human. The scope sat in a closet for 50 years, wrapped in the same cloth Jack had used in the Hurtgen forest. His children found it occasionally and played with it like a toy telescope, unaware that this crude assembly of brass and wire and German glass had killed 132 men. Danny Sullivan visited the farm twice a year until his death in 1989. They never talked about the war directly, just sat on the porch, drank coffee, and existed in the comfortable silence of men who had seen each other at their worst and best. When Danny died, his son called Jack. Dad wanted you to know you were the best friend he ever had. Said you saved his life 12 times. He saved mine more than that, Jack replied. Not with bullets, with understanding. In 1962, a researcher from the Army War College contacted Jack. Dr. Patricia Lawson was writing about sniper operations in World War II and had found Jack's name buried in classified after-action reports. Mr. McBride, records indicate you achieved 132 confirmed kills in 7 days using an improvised scope. Would you discuss it for the historical record? Jack, 41 years old now, farmer and father and man who still sometimes woke screaming from dreams of faces seen through perfect clarity, considered the request. I will talk to you, but I will not glorify it. The interview lasted 3 hours. Dr. Lawson asked about technical details and tactical decisions. Jack answered with the precision of an engineer and the reluctance of a man revisiting his own haunting. "What was the hardest part of those 7 days, Mr. McBride?" Jack looked out the window at his farm, at the life he had built from the wreckage of war. "Not the shooting. Shooting was mechanical. The hardest part was afterwards, looking at my notebook and seeing 132 numbers. 132 faces I will never forget. The scope made them so clear, too clear. I can still see every one of them." Dr. Lawson's research was published in classified military journals. Outside military circles, Jack's story remained unknown. He preferred it that way. Heroes were for men who wanted glory. Jack just wanted to forget, and forgetting proved impossible when you had seen your victims with such brutal clarity. In 1993, the week before Sarah died, she asked him the question she had held for 47 years. "Jack, do you ever think about the war?" He sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand that had grown so thin. "Every day. The men you killed? I see their faces, clear as the day I shot them, clearer than anything else in my life, except you." She squeezed his hand weakly. "You did what you had to do. You came home. You gave me a good life. That's enough." "Is it?" "It has to be." In 1995, at 74 years old, Jack donated his scope to the United States Army Ordnance Museum. Sarah had died 2 years earlier. His children were grown. His grandchildren asked too many questions about the weird telescope in Grandpa's closet. The scope deserved preservation, even if what it represented made Jack sick to remember. The museum director accepted the donation with military ceremony. Jack attended wearing the only suit he owned, looking uncomfortable under attention he had never sought. This scope represents one of the most remarkable examples of field innovation in military history, Mr. McBride. It represents what war forces men to become. Make sure people understand that. It is not a trophy. It is a warning. Today, the scope sits in a climate-controlled case, accompanied by Jack's notebook and photographs of the Kleinhaus sector and German documents referencing Der Geist. Museum visitors stand before it with reactions that range from awe to horror to confusion about how something so crude could have been so deadly. Jack McBride died in March 1998 at 77 years old. Lung cancer, unrelated to war. A lifetime of farm dust and the accumulated cost of living. His funeral drew 300 people, including 7 veterans of the 28th Infantry Division, who traveled from across the country to honor the man who had been the ghost. Also in attendance was Franz Schneider, son of Oberleutnant Karl Schneider. Kill number 132. He had come to say that his father had written about the American sniper with respect. That soldiers on both sides were just men doing impossible jobs in an impossible war. That maybe understanding was the only forgiveness anyone could offer. After the funeral, Jack's children found a second notebook in the attic. 50 years of theoretical scope designs, improvements, innovations that Jack had continued developing in private. The final entry, dated 1997, read, "Modern scopes are better than anything I could have imagined in 1944. But modern soldiers still face equipment shortages, different kinds. If any of them read this someday, do not wait for permission. Do not wait for perfect tools. Build what you need from what you have. Improvise. Adapt. Survive. That is the real lesson." The scope was just a scope. The lesson is you are more capable than you think. War will prove it. I hope you never have to learn that way. The scope remains on display today at the United States Army Ordnance Museum, a testament to American ingenuity and the terrible cost of innovation born from necessity. Museum visitors read the statistics. 132 confirmed kills. 7 days. One homemade scope, built from salvaged German optics, spent brass casings, and copper wire. They see the crude assembly and cannot reconcile the primitive appearance with the deadly efficiency. But Jack McBride understood what they do not. The scope was never about the materials. It was about the man behind it. About poverty teaching resourcefulness. About Mr. Chen teaching optics during lunch hours. About a mother's reading glasses turned into a rabbit scope at 15. About every lesson learned through necessity and hardship converging in one frozen forest when the army could not provide and a soldier refused to accept limitations. The ghost was never supernatural. Just a farmer from Oklahoma who knew how to fix things and shoot straight. War needed those skills. Jack provided them. 132 men died because he did his job with excellence, born from desperation. In 2025, a young Army Ranger stands before the scope display for 20 minutes. His unit just returned from deployment. Equipment failures, frustration, helplessness. Then he saw this crude assembly of salvage and desperation. Saw what one determined man built when the system failed him. He pulls out his phone and photographs the display. Not for social media, for himself. For the next time impossible seems like the final answer. Jack McBride has been dead for 27 years, but the lesson lives in brass and glass and the stubborn refusal to accept limitations. The scope waits in its case, silent, patient, ready to teach anyone willing to learn that impossible is just a word, and words mean nothing when necessity demands excellence. From Oklahoma clay to German forest to museum glass, from rabbit scope to ghost scope to legacy, 132 men died because Jack McBride saw clearly while his enemies groped in fog. But thousands since have lived because he proved that innovation born from desperation can defeat any obstacle when combined with skill, patience, and the refusal to accept that the system's failure means your failure. The scope sits in its case under soft museum lighting. Brass casings nested with improvised precision. Copper wire wrapped with a farmer's care. German glass that gathered light and death with equal efficiency. A placard tells the story, but the real story lives in that final notebook entry, written by a 76-year-old man who never stopped trying to teach what war had taught him. You are more capable than you think. War will prove it. Pray you never have to learn that way. The ghost was never a ghost, just a man who refused to stop when stopping would have been easier. That is the lesson. That is the legacy. That is why the scope remains, reminding every generation that resourcefulness, skill, and determination can overcome any limitation when survival demands excellence. Jack McBride built a scope from trash and killed 132 enemies in 7 days. But his real achievement was proving that American soldiers, when pushed to the edge, will innovate solutions that no factory anticipated and no doctrine predicted. The homemade scope should not have worked. Military engineers said so after examining it, but it did work. Because a stubborn farmer from Oklahoma refused to accept impossible as the final answer. And that refusal, more than any scope or any kill count,